Funny thing about Sarah and I moved here a bit over 4 years ago, a bit before St. Patrick's Day. That St. Patrick's Day was warm and sunny, like 75 degrees. And we thought, oh, Minnesota's not so bad. It's kind of nice here. We planted our tomatoes by the end of March, like, just about. Oh, they grew, it was great. And the funny thing about being here for 4 years is this is the second time I'm preaching on these texts. And if you remember, the last time I preached this text, I talked about the woman and her husband in this passage and what that really means. And the hard thing about interpreting John is that John uses lots and lots of metaphorical language in his passages, and it's very unclear at times whether these encounters that Jesus has with these individuals, whether they are encounters that happen in a historical sense, or whether John is trying to say something theologically. And there's a lot of tension between the metaphorical and the historical meanings of the gospel according to John. In particular, I take this passage to be full of metaphor, and that this woman who has this husband represents the Samaritan people and the different nations and the different gods whom control them and whom they worship over the years, and how from a Jewish point of view, having more than one husband meant that they were a corrupted people theologically and spiritually. You guys remember that sermon? Anybody here remember that? You get extra points if you do. Kate remembers, yes! Because she wrote it down in the minutes years ago. But this year I want to focus on two things. One, the well, and two, the temples. This well, where Jesus meets this Samaritan woman, has significance. So Jesus came to the Samaritan city near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. What is this well? It is a well of water. It is also a well of tradition, where Jesus sits and asks for something to drink. And he asks for a drink of water from this well of water and this well of tradition. And there's this fraught of meaning in this passage. There's this sense of that this well is connected back to Jacob, back to the ancient patriarchs. And it is through tradition that the Jewish people, the Samaritan people, had a sense of who they were in the world and what was important to them and what their identities were. They thought of themselves as belonging to historical tradition. That they would draw water from a well that was on the land that belonged to Jacob. They had this connection to the past. And so this discussion that Jesus has with the woman is not just about water. It's just not just about a well, it's about who are you? Who are you as a person? In reference to the past. In reference to your husband, the gods that you've had. Right? This well represents tradition as well as water. Same issue with the temples. It says later on, the second part of the reading, that the women will worship on this mountain or the Mount of Jerusalem, and they debate which mountain is the important one. The point being that there's two different temple mounts because there are two different traditions here. A disagreement between Samaritans and Jews about where was the proper place to worship God. There's this interesting connection between tradition, place, identity, and who they were in the moment. Right? Tradition and places form our identity. I've been thinking a lot about us today in our culture. What are our wells today? What are our temples today? If the well and the temple in this passage here is a place through which they connect with tradition in the sense of who they are, form us as a people today? What are our temples today? Now you might think, being good church folk, well, Union Presbyterian Church. That's a good answer. But when I think more broadly about our culture, think about places like the Mall of America. Because I went there yesterday. But I've been thinking about this all week long. I don't really like to shop. It's not something I do for fun. So if I go to the Mall of America, I have to gird myself spiritually before I go in. Pray, meditate, fast, feast, call upon the Lord. But I wanted to buy a shirt at a certain store, and Sarah had to return some clothes and get some new pants. And these stores only exist at the mall, not in Mankato, so we had to go. And I was remembering being in college in my first year, when Cal started taking my first geography class, as the Mall of America was opening. And I remember being in that class with Dr. Landgren, sitting around a table, debating whether or not the Mall of America would succeed, whether it would last even 5 or 10 years. And the question at the time was whether or not an institution, a place that big, with that much commercial square footage, would be able to survive. It was a discussion. I can't remember what I thought at the time. We had to write it down. I couldn't find what I wrote. But I think I was skeptical. And I think part of my skepticism was based on my hope that as Americans we would be defined as something other than our retail habits. That the biggest places in our society, the most important thriving places in our culture, would not be malls. I think young Andy Davis hopes that our culture would return to a sense of community, of local business, of storefronts on Main Street or Minnesota Avenue. That our culture would be one of small interactions between individuals at a very neighborhood kind of level. I was a kid who grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Right? That's my childhood ideal of what life should look like in America. That we are a country of neighborhoods, of friends, of neighbors, of small businesses, of I know you, and I go to your store, and you go to my church, and we all work together to make our community a better place. The young college Andy Davis was worried that this mall would succeed and that would change who we are as a country. So I think my skepticism was born out of my idealism. Well, as you know, the mall has succeeded. I haven't been to the mall in about 3 years, and I have to say that I was shocked at how successful the mall is. We drove there, and it's a Saturday afternoon in the middle of spring break, at the end of a long winter. But we had to kind of wait in line to even get our car into the garage. Like the lines for the parking lot were backed up almost to the interstate. Right? This is new to me. This is not 2 or 3 years ago. Now, cleverly, I discovered that if you drive around and go with a loading dock, you can cut through the back way in, so we got in. But still, the lines are all the way out the highway. Once you got into the largest parking ramp in North America, you had to drive around for 5 to 15 minutes before we got a spot to park. And we crammed our little Honda Civic in there, wedged between 2 SUVs on the side. And then we go into the mall, and it was like a stream of people entering. And we go in, and there's people everywhere, and we finally find our store, and Sarah changed her pants, and I'm wandering around Zav, and then we go down to the Camp Snoopy, is that, right, the place? What's it called now, Nickelodeon Paradise or something? And I told Zeb that I'd bring him on a ride, and that was a mistake because there were lines to buy the tickets to get on the rides, and then there were lines to get on the rides, and I knew he wouldn't tolerate that, so we skipped it. And then we went to Legoland, and there was basically no place to sit down, and we wedged in anyhow. And then Sarah wanted a coffee, and I was thirsty too, so I wandered up to Starbucks and had to stand in line to get a Starbucks coffee. It was, I'm still blown away by it. You know, I fought them all won. I don't know anything about this. What does it mean to be a Christian in the Mall of America? What does it mean to be someone who believes in places like St. Peter, Minnesota? Who believes in neighborhood? Who believes in supporting a local business? Who believes in serving our nonprofits with you? Who believes that community is really important? Who believes in places like Union Presbyterian Church, a neighborhood church with a small parking lot, plenty of space in the pews? What does it mean to be a Christian in the Mall of America? I don't know the answer. But I think the question matters. Because I think there's something valuable about this. Places like St. Peter, places like Union. And I want to see places like Union and places like St. Peter thrive in this culture, in this world. I want to see places that exemplify community where people can come together to celebrate baptisms, to celebrate marriages, to celebrate funerals, to celebrate life, to be together for each other in the difficulties of life. I want to live in a community where people know each other so we can support each other the way this community came together after the tornado, as was mentioned earlier in adult study. I want to live in a place where I know my neighbors and they know me, and when my neighbor's gas breaks down, or natural gas pipe breaks, that they just come to my house and take natural gas from my house and put it in her house, and that's okay. Right? You all know what the temples are today in our culture? The wells, it's the mall. It's a rather big temple. What does it mean to be a Christian in the Mall of America? We're building a new temple in Minneapolis, a new Metrodome stadium, publicly financed. I have mixed feelings about that. I like the Vikings, I want them to win, but why? You know, I don't know. You don't know where the Mall of America is located? Remember what was there before? Met Stadium. And you remember what replaced Met Stadium? The Metrodome. You know where the temple in Jerusalem is? There's no temple there anymore. The temple in Samaria, it doesn't exist anymore. The Met Stadium is gone. The Metrodome is torn down. These big institutions, they are so big and so powerful and get so much tax support and are so used by our culture, they fall down. They are destroyed. They don't last very long. I don't know how long the Mall of America will last, but it doesn't have resilience. It doesn't have the kind of resilience like a community does. Like Union Presbyterian Church, where this building's been around forever in this community. So I know it's important. Somehow or other, there's a sense, in my mind, that worship in churches and neighborhoods is important. It says here, God is spirit. And those who worship God must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will proclaim all things to us. And Jesus said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. somehow